It was murder most foul, not the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. I'll come to that in a minute. It's a war between Israel and the Lebanese resistance, and you must expect that leaders eventually will be targeted. Although I caution that that is a double-edged sword, and it may even be the case that Netanyahu himself was injured at the Ben Gurion airport last evening on his touching down from New York. Certainly there have been no signs of life of Netanyahu since the Israeli press revealed that either the aircraft or his house appeared to have been struck all the way from Yemen by a ballistic missile attack. So what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And if the Israeli state is really going to murder the heads of countries and organizations around the world, they must expect that they will receive the same in return. But the murder most foul was the 6 high-rise buildings that were reduced to dust and the huge number of civilian casualties that were regarded as mere collateral damage. A bit like an organization, I don't know, Hezbollah, bringing the United Nations building down with every single person in it because Netanyahu was somewhere in the building. Again, about which more later. A bit like the British state destroying the Falls Road and killing everyone who lived there because a leader of the IRA had been suspected of being present on the street. You get my drift. The hundreds, now probably thousands, of Lebanese casualties over the last 72 hours is, of course, an all-out war. Don't be fooled when they say they're bombing Hezbollah. I remember I was in Beirut in 1982 when Israel invaded the country, and how frustrated it felt to see reports that Israel was bombing PLO bases when I knew that they were bombing Palestinian refugee camps. The truth is, they are murdering Lebanese people. They are murdering Muslims, Sunni and Shia. They are murdering Christians. They are bombing the towns and villages in which Jesus walked, including amongst people who still speak the language of Jesus. The Christian world is entirely silent about all of that. Lebanon, a sovereign country, a member of the United Nations, every country in the world has an ambassador in Beirut. It's ordinarily a very nice posting. Are absolutely silent, doing nothing, saying nothing about the reduction, yet again, of an Arab capital city to dust, to ash. And the most silent of all are the other Arab countries in whose league, the Arabs have a league, in whose league Lebanon sits. The entire Muslim world is absolutely silent, struck dumb, and powerless, paralyzed, can do nothing. After 12 months of wholesale slaughter of Palestinian children and women in Gaza, after decades of land grabbing, house demolition, the construction of illegal settlements, nobody is ready to take control of the violent attack dog known as the State of Israel. It is, as I've said before, a vindication of the thesis of my compatriot Mary Shelley, the writer of Dr. Frankenstein, that once you've made Frankenstein, you don't control Frankenstein, he controls you. The monster controls you, and the monster is in charge. There is no doubt at all that the United States is deeply complicit in what has been happening in Lebanon over the last 72 hours. Their aircraft carriers, their warships are just offshore to provide moral and later perhaps material and men, for the Israeli war effort in Lebanon. The President of the United States and the Vice President, and now presidential candidate Kamala Harris, have fully supported the slaughter of the Lebanese. Good luck, Kamala Harris, in the state of Michigan come November the 5th. The United States, the European Union, all of the usual suspects who support the great crimes of Israel to a greater or lesser extent, to the nth degree, are all jointly and severally responsible for the massacres of the Lebanese people. If I seem emotional about this, well, Lebanon is where I came in. I first entered the Arab world, its culture, its religions, its cuisine, its music, everything about it. I entered it through the portal of Lebanon. These Lebanese people are precious to me, and many, many of them are being slaughtered right now. The question is, was it a smart move by Israel? I see the usual suspects, either ISIS and Al-Qaeda supporters, including here in Britain, quite boldly, shooting the ISIS-Al-Qaeda breeze on social media. No algorithmic strangling for them, no shadow banning for them, dancing on the grave of Hassan Nasrallah and his comrades in the leadership of the Lebanese resistance. Zionists, of course, celebrating, but they will not necessarily be celebrating for long. But the liberal intelligentsia are queuing up in the newspapers, in the columns, on social media to declare that Hezbollah is finished. Well, they're making, in my view, a very big mistake. First of all, although Nasrallah is no ordinary leader, he himself built up Hezbollah from a group of young men. When I was in Lebanon in 1982, Hezbollah didn't exist, and no one actually felt any political presence of the majority Shia community in Lebanon. They were out in the cold, had no political voice, no political strength, and definitely no military strength. Hassan Nasrallah changed all of that. He made that small group of young men of the Shia sect of Islam, he made them into a mighty army. And they are still a mighty army. As residents all over Israel found out overnight, the idea that killing Nasrallah, killing 10 or 11 or 12 commanders who unaccountably, 10 of them were in the same apartment when they were killed, there are deep-seated security blunders at the heart of all of this. It's not my business to advise. It's not even necessarily my business to discuss. But suffice to say, there are security lapses in the Lebanese resistance that one presumes will right now be being plugged. But the idea that killing these commanders meant that the men in the field were now powerless to strike came to a rude end overnight, where hundreds of ballistic missile, as well as the usual Katyushas, as well as the usual drone strikes and so on. Israel was in flames overnight. The airport was hit. Netanyahu's house may have been hit. The towns that never had to run for the aircraft shelters are now this evening in the aircraft shelters. So, militarily speaking, Hezbollah still packs a powerful punch. I'll go further. I'll say to Mr. Netanyahu and his chorus of gangsters around the world, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I firmly believe that. I'm not starry-eyed about any liberation movement's prospects of success. It's not easy to fight and win a revolution. It's not easy to liberate your country. There is no easy walk to freedom, as Nelson Mandela told us on the front cover of his own memoirs, there is no easy walk to freedom. Sacrifices will always have to be made. There is no final victory. There is no final defeat. The struggle continues, and it will continue for a very long time, generation after generation. The idea that a leader like Nasrallah can be easily replaced is, of course, fanciful. It is comparable, I saw this written earlier today, it is comparable to Stalin being killed in the early part of Barbarossa, in the early part of the Second World War. If Stalin had been killed, it would have been a monumental Everestian blow to the morale of the Soviet Union and the leadership of that country, but the Soviet Union would still have prevailed. It would still have made it all the way to Berlin to crush the beast in his lair. That much I'm certain of. A leader like Nasrallah comes along once in 100 years, maybe more than that. His cousin, Safiuddin, who is the new leader of Hezbollah, is reportedly far more radical than Hassan Nasrallah was, which is another lesson to chalk up on the blackboard when we're doing the accounting of this whole thing. I told people, I told Parliament 100 times, make a deal with Arafat, because after Arafat comes the deluge. After Arafat comes people who you will not be able to make a deal with. Nobody listened. They killed Arafat. Nobody listened when they killed Rantisi, the former leader of Hamas. Did Hamas get weaker once their leader were killed? No, they got stronger. They killed Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, about which more later. Did that finish Hamas? Don't be stupid. Don't be ridiculous. This all stems from an Orientalist misunderestimation, as George W. Bush would put it, of the Muslim character. Now, don't get me wrong. If I'm not starry-eyed about liberation movements, I sure ain't starry-eyed about Muslims. There are 2 billion Muslims in the world. At least 1 billion of them are hypocrites. They care more for this life, this dunya, than for the judgment day. They use Islam to stay in power. They use Islam to enrich themselves. Or they use Islam to control their wives, to control their daughters, to impose a conservative lifestyle, at least on their families. 1 billion hypocrites in the Muslim Ummah. But there's another 1 billion who are absolutely sincere, who love God more than they love life, who love their cause, their religion, their deen more than they love life, who believe in the judgment day, who believe that what counts, what matters, is what happens on that judgment day. What is your destination once you have been judged? There's 1 billion of those. And they are in every Arab country. And they are Sunni and they are Shia. And they are being underestimated by Western commentators and Western political leaders. But I've got to tell you something else. Of the 1 billion who are filled with sincerity and éclat, in that regard at least, in their deep-seated belief that dishonor is worse than death, most of them are Shiites. That's the truth of it. That's why Iran is the only anti-imperialist country to have survived everything for 44 years. That's why Hezbollah has been able to grow from a few men to 100,000 men, armed to the teeth, as Netanyahu will find out if his soldiers cross the border this evening. The Shiites are very deep believers, and they love their martyrs with a passion which is visceral. It is sometimes quite difficult for the Western mind to handle, to see the adulation, to see the flagellation to see Karbala in the full pilgrimage mode, to see the streets of Lebanon tonight as they mourn in the streets their slain leader Hezbollah. Don't underestimate these people. You'd be a fool if you do. Sure, they killed 10, 12 commanders. Sure, they killed the supreme leader of the movement, of the organization. But they have made thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands more across the region and across the world. I've often said, when people ring me up here saying, "Are you not afraid you're going to be killed?" I said, I'm not afraid of death. What matters is how you die, for what you die, and how many people come to pick up your microphone, your pen, your rifle, once you have fallen. And I mean that. And if I mean it, be sure that the people who support Hezbollah really, really mean it. So Hezbollah is not defeated. If you think that, you are a fool. And last night, and I'm sure again tonight, the full force of what the resistance has to offer Netanyahu will again be on display. But the shoe, which I'll grant you has not yet dropped, is the Iranian shoe. There is a crescent. I wrote about it in 1982 or 3. I coined the phrase, a crescent of crisis, stretching from Iran all the way to the Levant. An axis of resistance which forms a crescent and which has powerful players within it. In Iraq, who have scarcely begun to speak, but if you're an American watching with a son in the American bases in Iraq, you have to do everything that you can to get your government to withdraw them before another Benghazi to the power of 10 occurs. In Yemen, who have proven themselves, not to me because I always knew it, but to others, the Yemenis are possibly, pound for pound, though the poorest country in the world, possibly the best fighters in the whole world are the Yemenis. And they're proving it again in this war of attrition. Damascus was bombed. Today we don't yet know the details, just that it was a powerful explosion in the middle of Damascus. It may be that Netanyahu intends to open a Syrian front, in which case, again, he is underestimating not just the Syrians, but the resolve of their Russian allies. Russia will never abandon Syria. They've come too far. Russia was an ally of Syria for 54 years. They're not going to relinquish that position. They have military bases there. They have naval bases there, Air Force bases there. They have many troops there. And they have many anti-aircraft batteries of S-400s that can bring down every F-35 that Israel or the United States puts into the skies. Russia will fight for Syria. So if they intend to include Syria in their battle plans, they're again going to have a rude awakening. But the big shoe is the Iranian shoe. Some people are laughing at Iran's failure to respond. There's ample reason to believe that if Iran had responded after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, that Hassan Nasrallah might still be alive today, because a new deterrence might have been established. But Iran will answer. And when Iran answers, then we've got a regional war. Stay tuned. This is the mother of all talk shows.